Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this final broadcast of 2023. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator.
How are you this evening, sir?
Oh, fine. Mixed feelings. Last session of the year, and I'm already missing it. But I suppose one cannot cheat nature. I've got to rest.
Yeah, I can see a bounce in your look and in your face this evening. I'm starting to feel that. Is it because we're ending the year that the bounce is there? All right, good, sir. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this evening. Well, maybe we should start this week, sir, talking about some of the breaking news in the foreign affairs and the diplomatic world, I should say, and that is the passing of Henry Kissinger in the United States, and to see what your reaction is to that news that got released earlier on today.
Well, Shakespeare wrote in Julius Caesar that when beggars die, no comets are seen, but the heavens themselves blaze forth the death of princes. He didn't say whether it was a wicked prince or a good prince. He just said princes. So presumably we will have to apply that to Henry Kissinger. This is a year of princes going. We had Her Majesty the Queen to the list. I'm sure if I think carefully, I could come up with the list of more princes that we've lost this year. The media has been full, of course, of comments. I won't say tribute. I would say comments on the death of Kissinger. Tribute will imply that all of them are positive. You know, in Africa, we always say, don't speak evil of the dead. I'm sure that I'm glad that we have abandoned, that saying, or else we wouldn't be talking about the colonial period, what the Germans did to us, what the British did to the Mau Mau in Kenya, and all that. So I don't think I'm breaking culture if I speak truth, my version of the truth about my feelings about Kissinger. I believe that Kissinger was one of the most wicked intellectuals, wicked scholars that have ever put their talents at the disposal of people in power. If you go through the history of the Russians, suppose they had their own, the Tsars had their own wicked advisors. kings always have someone who didn't believe in the commandments, rather believed, in all the shenanigans of power rather than the goodness to which power could be put. I don't doubt the fact that Kissinger had talent, but I think he was overrated. Anyone who had access to power, whose one finger was just near the nuclear button, could be regarded as a genius because he will have his way by, bombing everybody who gets in his way. I mean, after all, I suppose if Hitler did not lose the Second World War, we would regard them also as a genius. And here was a man who, using the Nazis, the Panzer movement, and all this, was able to overrun, Eastern Europe, overrun Western Europe, and only the sea and the Americans saved Great Britain from being overrun by Hitler. If he had won, we would be regarding him as a genius. So we regard Kissinger, or some people regard Kissinger as a genius because on Christmas Day, he bombed Vietnam 24 hours round the clock. A Christian nation bombed a non-Christian nation 24 hours round the clock. As he was negotiating a peace treaty with North Vietnam, on his advice, Nixon was bombing the Cambodians. So only God knows where we go when we die. That he did. The Middle East, where it's been credited with ceasefire pact between the Arabs and the Israelis. Well, the threat he issued to even the Soviet Union, that even at the same time that the United States was flying, I don't know how many aircraft loads of weapons to Israel, he warned the Russians, who were Soviet Union at that time, that America was prepared to shoot down their planes if they tried to resupply weapons to Egypt and Syria at that time. I don't think that he used power for the good of the world. I have had the privilege of listening to the White House recording, the Oval Office recording of his conversation with Nixon. And while he will come and debrief the press to give the impression to the press, the American press, that he is the one who was holding, holding Nixon, putting pressure on Nixon to temper the issues of power. When you listen to those tapes, In fact, he was the one who was advocating vicious use of power. And Nixon was the one who was sounding like a statesman. It was Kissinger uh, who was the evil genius of power. Let's put it that way. And there's an episode that I have since learned about. Israel was trying to appeal to the United States to please use their influence on the Soviet Union to allow Jews to move out of the Soviet Union to Israel. And on the tape, it was Golda Meir who was prime minister of Israel at that time. Both Nixon and Kissinger were promising Golda Meir that they would try and use their influence to facilitate that. As soon as Golda Meir dropped the phone at her end, it was Kissinger, a Jew, who himself had fled Germany and has sought and got, he was granted asylum in the United States, who said to Nixon, it is not part of American interest to rescue Jews in the Soviet Union. Okay, that didn't sound bad, but the next sentence was what left me shaking. He said, if the communists want to feed them into the gas oven, it is not American concern. It may be humanitarian concern. Here was a Jew saying that to his president. So in a way, I'm sorry that I don't think the world has lost anything. The Americans may feel they have lost something by his death. I don't think that the world has lost anything by his death. And I think that we scholars, in assessing the impact and the status of Henry Kissinger, we should become more we should maybe be less enamored about the use of power. I'm not even sure that Hans Morgenthau, who was a scholar in the real politics of international relations, would have approved how Kissinger used power in order to advance the interest of the United States. So I wish him well wherever he's going, and I hope that God will be more merciful to him than the mercy that Kissinger showed towards the people he dealt with. He was given the Nobel Peace Prize. I don't think he deserved it. But then Nobel Peace Prize is granted by human beings, and we are bound to make mistakes from time to time.
Sir, could it be that some of the way he operated at the time were due to the circumstances that were prevailing at that point in time? Because if we start to look at the evolution of diplomacy, the evolution of foreign policy over time, and we bring that into the case in Qatar, for example, where we're seeing some interesting developments of how Qatar has been able to stand in the middle of Hamas and Israel. Would you say things are different now compared to where he was at the time, which therefore meant that maybe we need to be a little bit more lenient with him?
I don't think so. The laws of international humanitarian affair was in existence before Kissinger. And I'm sure that if Kissinger had anything to do, he would never have allowed the United States to sign the international humanitarian law. In fact, one of his sayings was that, nations that want to play important role in the world should not allow morality to dictate their positions in the world. No, I don't think so at all. And I believe that the fact that the world itself, through the instrumentality of the United Nations, kept, if you like, kept pushing humanity towards a value-driven international relations, shows that, human beings are not driven just by power alone, but that they believe human beings have values. Most of those, and in fact, I thought, with where we should be drawing up our attention to, especially in Great Britain now, is the position of immigrants who have got to power in the United Kingdom, who have now become so vitriolic in their views about immigrants, that if their views, the views which they espouse now, if those views have been what was driving British policy, they would probably never have been allowed into Britain. But now they're in Britain, they are ministers, high ministers of state for that matter, and they're the most vitriolic in their attitude towards immigrants. So I don't think yes, I think I understand where you are going. The world at that time was probably too much on edge because it was at the height of the Cold War. I suppose that's what you meant. But the world was at the site of the Cold War during the Cuban crisis, and a John F. Kennedy with values, who had lost the two brothers. No, he'd lost one brother, his elder brother. He'd lost, who was in the American Air Force, and John F. Kennedy himself had his back broken as a naval officer in the United States, as a military officer, as a president of the United States, showed more appreciation about the limitations of power. And nobody said he gave up American interests. He faced down the Soviet Union, all right, but he didn't do so. In fact, he resisted the pressure on him. I was in the United States at that time, and I could reel off the names of the service chiefs at that time who were putting pressure on him to bomb Cuba. bomb the service personnel of the Soviet Union. And he said, no, there must be a way of resolving disputes than by resorting to, Kissinger's first book was written on what he called the actualization of tactical nuclear weapons. He was the first scholar to talk about the utilization of technical nuclear weapons. One wonders if he had been working for the Nazis, where the world would have been at this time. That was his first book.
Yeah, I think the point I was referring to, sir, is that if I look at the immigration point you talked about, sir, 21, 22 years ago in the UK, when I walked through one of the stations, we could count the number of Black people that we saw. And when we passed ourselves, we nodded and we said, I see you. We walked past, even though we had never met them, but we knew ourselves. Now it's almost the reverse. You walk through so many Black faces. So on the one hand, one would say that this is advancement. People are moving around and people are continuing their lives. So the challenge of immigration that we have now, maybe 30, 40 years ago, was a different face and therefore required a different way of thinking about the problem compared to the way some would be thinking about the problem today. And that's why I'm saying that could it be that there were certain elements like that that could have influenced that behavior or that attitude compared to today?
Again, I will still disagree with you because I was aware of a British cabinet minister who was dismissed because even at the time you were talking about, he talked about the rivers of blood arising from the inflow of immigrants into Britain. I can't remember his name now, but he was a cabinet minister and he was dismissed. What is lacking are humanitarian values in the highest echelons of power. That's what Kissinger epitomized. And that is what Suriname, Remy, whatever her other name is, that's what is now lacking. That's what Trump epitomizes now. There's a direct, lineage from Kissinger to Trump. If you are going to be criticizing Trump now, you cannot be praising Kissinger. You cannot.
Thank you, sir. Let me go to Qatar and the Middle East, and we talk about the role that Qatar has played and how Qatar has been able to mediate the conflict that's going on there. So much so that we're almost sitting down listening to the Qatari spokesperson or listen to the king himself and the emir, and they are the ones giving us the news of Hamas is now going to do this, Hamas is now going to do that, Israel is going to do this, we're now agreeing this. What made Qatar such a unique country? What was their capability that made them stand out and able to play this role compared to some of the other countries who also had hostages that had been taken?
It's I think we will have to accept that this is diplomacy at its best. We often think that diplomacy is all about, drinks and, cocktail parties and speeches at conferences that lead to nowhere. I think what we've just seen in Qatar's diplomatic role is what diplomacy can achieve if, I read a book once and I agreed that diplomacy and democracy should not go together. That again, when diplomacy moved away from being the art between kings and royalty, and you start allowing, your hopaloi, to now have the say in what your diplomats do, and cables start becoming, cables, what is embedded in cables become available, to people who probably cannot even spell diplomacy. I believe that we did a disservice to diplomacy. You see, the emir of Qatar was the royalty of Qatar. Yes, of course, he had advisors. He has advisors, and he consulted the advisors. But then when he would say, this is why we should do ABC, that was the end of the debate. So what happened? Qatar allowed the United States to base one of its biggest naval bases in the Middle East, was based in Qatar. You didn't have demonstration in the streets. You didn't have, newspaper editorials to talk about the emir selling out Qatar to the Americans. No. So just racket there. Then the emir decided, of course, he had to persuade the Americans, persuade the Egyptians, and that there's a place where if you want to talk to Hamas, you didn't need to go to Gaza. The leadership of Hamas should have immunity and protection in an Arab country where you can talk to them directly, where you can advise them, where you can put pressure on them to be reasonable when it was called for, without selling out the Arab cause. And the wisdom of the emir persuaded, number one, Hamas, that they will not be sold out, and that therefore they could open, I won't call it an embassy, let's say an office in Qatar. He succeeded in persuading the other Arab countries that in having a naval base by the Americans, he wasn't selling out the Arab cause, but that it gave the Americans also the assurance that the emir could be counted upon to be reasonable. And the time now came when these two played together. Confidence by the Americans in the wisdom of the emir, confidence by Hamas that they could have the ear of the emir and that he wouldn't sell them out. And all that played together to allow the emir to play the role that is playing now. Now, let me, as I often do on our platform like this, draw some takeaways from my own time when I was in the corridors of power. I was never in the bedroom of power. That was left to people who are wearing uniforms and so on. I was always just on the corridor peeping in. One of the first suggestions that I made when I was DGNI, I said, look, if you look at the oceans of the world, Mediterranean, the Pacific, the Southeast Asian Ocean, these have become contentious areas between the Soviet Union and the United States. And that the only virgin ocean that we have that is still left uncontested and uncontaminated was the South Atlantic Ocean. And that, therefore, we, Nigeria, because we had credibility. At that time, we had credibility. We should approach Brazil and approach Angola. So we will have a Nigerian, Angola, Brazil alliance to guarantee the sanctity of the South Atlantic Ocean and build our naval forces in order to, because not to face down the United States or face down the Soviet Union, but to let the Soviet Union know that we will keep the Americans out if we get commitment that we will keep the Soviet Union out. Well, I was almost roasted alive by so-called Nigerian socialists. I won't mention the universities where they were located, that I was selling out Angola, that was pure socialist, that I was being used as an agent of the Americans so that Nigeria and Brazil will now join together in order to squash the Angolans. And I had added that when South Africa became independent, South Africa will join us, while perhaps Argentina or Chile will join from the other side. I was almost crucified. That the military government in power at that time was frightened, even though I had, behind the scene, cleared the idea with them, cleared the idea and got approval so that the foreign minister in situ at that time was the one who came to give the keynote address at the high-level seminar. But as soon as trouble started, I had to take the blame for everything. And so, well, we were then left continuing to mouth, oh, we are, a member of the frontline countries, we did this, we did that, and so on. But to have this, what I will call, bright utilization of our position. No, no, not at all. Instead, those who were in power at that time would rather fight for who will be ambassador there, and what have you. That's the first one. The second one was when I was a minister. Again, I approached my boss, IBB at that time, and I said, sir, we keep getting signals from South Africa, aided and abetted, of course, by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. I said, of course, we should shoot down these signals we are getting from them, because the signals were not in our national interest. They just want us to be part of the let us have a dialogue. I said, but let us identify one of our embassies somewhere where the South African ambassador and the Nigerian ambassador could not be on speaking terms, but a wink and a nod, and we let them know that when they have any important message of change that they want to pass on, they can speak to that our ambassador. But apart from that, all our embassies are, blocked to the South Africans. This was again leaked to the press, and again, the same socialists. And this was at the time when the Soviet Union was already wobbling. The same socialists came after me that, they'd always known that I was, an American agent, and here was I coming up with this. I want to sell out the interests of the South Africans and what have you, that had to be shut down. Of course, after I left being minister, somewhere along the line, down the line, that proposal was then put in place and, implemented. So you could see that if Qatar had been in the position of Nigeria, where, you had socialists who were more socialist than the socialists themselves, people did not even know. They might have forgotten. We have very short memories in this country. When South Africa became, when it got its freedom from the apartheid countries, and it decided to keep the name South Africa, socialists in Nigeria went bananas that this was a betrayal of, African socialism and this and that, and that the name for South Africa should be the Zulu name for South Africa. Thank God, Mandela didn't listen to them. He suffered more than, the armchair socialists who were in Nigeria. But they were going to be more South African than the South Africans themselves. So we've paid the heavy price in a way in terms of what our democracy, what our diplomacy could have achieved. Qatar not being a democratic country with free press and free student union is now playing a role that all Qatarians or Qataris, could claim credit for and be proud of it. These are things which I will ascribe to the, to the success of Qatar. It didn't sell out It didn't sell out the Arab cause. It didn't sell out the Palestinian cause. But when you look at the, if you like, the on the chessboard, the power outlay, there's the cat, the Hamas are never going to defeat Israel, especially not the Israel backed up by the Americans. Therefore, you needed an interlocutor who, when trouble came, could speak to the Americans and will have credibility, could speak to Hamas, will have credibility, will speak to other Arab countries, will have credibility. And this is what has happened in the case of Qatar.
Thank you for that, sir. There's a question on immigration that I want to ask you, but I'll come back to that, sir, at the end, because you said something that I want to home in on. But still on the Middle East, there was an interview I watched about one of the foreign affairs spokesperson for Thailand, who was thanking Iran for the role that Iran played in getting the release of the Thai citizens that had been taken hostages, because the Thais had the largest, they were the largest group of non-Israelis that were taken as hostages by Hamas. The person was thanking Iran for the role that Iran played in negotiating their release. And I wanted to ask you, sir, what's your view on that?
Well, my takeaway, because I read that interview as well, three things. One, the smart utilization of resources. Even though Thailand is a Buddhist country, it has only a minority of Muslims, but it was a Muslim delegation that was sent to Iran to help in negotiating the release of the Thai people who were kidnapped. In other words, they recognized that Hamas was a Muslim movement that had relationship with Iran. Therefore, their government sent out a Thai delegation made up of Muslims, so that in dealing with them, in fact, the Thai spokesperson said, Hamas saw us as fellow Muslims. They didn't see us as politicians. The same thing with Iran. Here are fellow Muslims who recognize that we have some influence in this place. That was a clever use of, what I will call factorial personnel. In other countries, they say, no, send a foreign minister. Yes, so the man is a foreign minister, but the man, the foreign minister does not have the kind of, factors that they could activate to interest Hamas and to interest the Iranians. But in the case of Thailand, they did. But again, if you remember the context of that interview, Hamas then warned them that the Thai farmers who were going to Israel to work on the farms that were on that land between Gaza and Israel. We're working on disputed land which properly did not belong to Israel, and that really they shouldn't make that mistake again. And then they released them and they were among those being released to Israel. Not all of them have been released, but it's a clever move. So this is why you've got to have bright diplomats whom you listen to and who you allow to play their role rather than contaminate their role by the kind of features that you have back in your own country, where people will have said, where should we send, Islamic minorities? Or if it's the other way around, why should we send Christian minorities? You will recall, I think the last 2 weeks, we were talking about how we can use our traditional rulers, and without driving home or over driving home the point, we pointed out that while you can use Muslim traditional rulers in our relationship with the North, you can use Southern traditional rulers in our relationship with, southern part of Africa and in Brazil, Cuba, the West Indies, and so on. So that way you don't send, a southern traditional ruler to go and mediate in Morocco, while you don't send a northern emir to go and mediate some problem in the West Indies.
So were you surprised at the way other countries that had nationals as part of the hostages approached their own negotiations, if I could use that word, because they appeared to be more silent. They were not as vocal about the release of their own citizens. We were not hearing about potential planned operations to go and get their own citizens released. Were you surprised about that, or is that normal in diplomatic circles?
It will be normal if you've got a wise Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where, again, as I said, you will allow you will allow brain and merit to override emotion and sentimentality. Part of what has been, I like this question because it allows us to deal with the issue of all Africans are equal mentality that overrides, policies and the operations of first the OAU and now the African Union. When you look at people who become chairman of African Union, president of the African Union Commission, and so on, and you say to yourself, are these the people representing Africa? How do the others look at us? Do they give us the same recognition? Now, I suppose it's easier for me to say this because you say, oh, well, yes, he is indirectly preaching Nigerian leadership. But diplomacy and like politics, has to take cognizance of who has the power and who doesn't have the power. So you don't start sending Boy Scouts to go and face down all this kind of jihadists in the Sahel. In fact, one of the things that I would say has underpinned part of what we've been saying on this program is look at the way Mali has succeeded in driving the Tuaregs back into the Sahara Desert, something which the French have not done for all this. The only time the French military force, picked up got its act together was when the Tuaregs were about to enter Bamako, the capital of Mali. Then they were activated and they drove them back. But once they then left Bamako, they left them alone. Why? Now, the armed forces of the Malians have succeeded in driving them into the Sahel, which shows that it could be done. The French were just playing this for their own interests. So, but if the Malians are just sent Boy Scouts to go after the Tuaregs, of course, they'll just have wasted in fact, they'll be regarded as unserious. They will have wasted the lives of the Boy Scouts. And I think the African Union has to accept the fact that we've now left that decade of independence when we were all equal. Now, this is no longer Animal Farm where all animals were equal. We've got to now to a stage where all we need to do is, you don't reinvent the wheel. Just look at the way NATO operates in terms of its recognition of the United States. Who pays for what? Who has, the most constellation of armed forces? Because in diplomacy, at the end of the day, what counts is, what forces you can put, on the theater of action.
There's one big topic that I would like to get your views on, sir, before we close this evening. And this was the news by the, should I say, new Home Secretary in the UK, who said that he was hoping if they could get the Rwandan-style deal of moving immigrants to Rwanda off the ground, he was hoping that he could sign 5 more deals with other countries. Now, he didn't qualify that it was other African countries, but he said other countries. And the fact that Germany was also looking to implement a similar type of program. Does this spell trouble for Africa if now Europe, UK, and who knows which other group would be looking to move immigrants to other places like Rwanda, which, of course, I would assume that could include more African countries. How should Africa respond if Africa is approached? And I'm using Africa collectively, obviously, the individual countries need to respond. How should we respond if that indeed takes off and they want to move more people to Africa?
Well, I haven't really given it more thought on the collective play. Obviously, it does not speak well of us that we will be regarded as a dumping ground for immigrants. We will just be bought off. I mean, this is another version of slavery, isn't it? We will be bought off to take on immigrants from other countries. The immigrants, obviously, and I think I've said it on this program, the immigrants cannot be Africans because already we take on our fellow Africans. We take them on. Our borders are open. So they are not talking about, sending people from Gambia to Senegal or that kind of thing. They are talking about sending Afghanistan, Iraqis, Syrians to Africa. And in a way, the presidents who are accepting these people are involved in playing what one would call the ethnic plurality game for election time when election comes. And I think it's a dangerous game to play. We have enough problems in Africa than to take in foreigners so that at election time, they will know how to vote. Because the implication of that is they will then be targeted as enemies by the other ethnic or subnationality group. They will now target them, and that will simply complicate, the plurality game for us here. So I don't know where they'll be talking about, because which countries? Is it the West Indies, who in terms of human rights have a higher positivity of human rights than African countries, who will allow their country to be used as dumping ground for immigrants coming from other countries? Their parliament just wouldn't even allow it. Their parliament wouldn't allow it. Their National Assembly, who usually have more independence, will not allow it. This can only be Africa, where the executive hand in hand, cahoots with the National Assembly, where this kind of thing can be played, this kind of game can be played. Well, the new the new foreign secretary of England comes from Sierra Leone. Maybe so that's where he will start with playing the Rwandese game.
The new Home Secretary, you mean?
Sorry?
I said the new Home Secretary.
The new Home Secretary, yeah. He was a previous Foreign Secretary.
Foreign Secretary, yes, sir.
Yeah, he's the new Home Secretary. He's from Sierra Leone. So maybe that's where he will start trying to play this game free. But really, maybe the African Union again should have a debate on this and take a position that it will not speak well of Africa if we allow people to do this kind of thing with us.
My last question of the year for you, sir. Last question is, the US has accused India, or a government official of India, of trying to assassinate a Sikh separatist on US soil. What kind of a diplomatic nightmare is that going to create for India?
I suppose when we said that the chicken had come home to roost, we started off this program talking about Henry Kissinger. How many heads of states did under Henry Kissinger did the CIA assassinate? Assassination as a weapon of diplomacy is not starting with India. Of course, I mean, I'm not in favor of that. Don't get me wrong, especially having been a Nadeko man living in exile, running away from a military dictator. I possibly cannot be in favor of assassination as a weapon of diplomacy, but it exists. Don't think that it has stopped. Maybe India has just got itself its fingers caught in the cookie jar. This thing happens. It still happens. If you can't get away with it, don't try it. Don't try it.
On that note, we'll bring the program to a close this evening. Thank you very much, sir, for another year of insight into diplomacy. I feel that I have learned enough for me to now start looking for a role in diplomacy or diplomatic quarters. Thank you very much.
A professor of diplomacy.
Yes, maybe we say we've been in school, weekly classes for 168 sessions. Maybe that's enough to get me a certificate of something.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bolaji. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Hello, Prof. There's a development that should be of concern for you, even though you are taking your break.
Yes.
That is the Sahel. The Sahel, which is the new name of the currency, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have put in place.
Yes.
The other time, Alassane Ouattara and his colleagues stole, I use the word stole consciously, the name ECO, which was meant to be adopted by the ECOWAS.
Yes.
Now, while that one is on, we now have the Sahel, they call it the Sahel, as the new currency, which they are promoting. Russia, China, and Turkey are giving active support, which now means that regionalism at the level of the ECOWAS, we need now to be taken more seriously. Will that not eventually, in the long run, undermine the ECOWAS? But your sagacious mind, even if you are on break, even if you are resting, we will this to be taken up, sir.
Professor Akinyemi, thank you for teasing me. A French minister arrived in Nigeria, I think yesterday, and he will be the 5th French minister who will come to Nigeria this year. In fact, you being our, grand patron in French African politics, should actually be the one to handle that question. The effect of Sahel on ECOWAS, on ECO. Maybe you know that ECOWAS succeeded in shooting down the French undermining of our efforts. Now that this Francophonie have kicked out France, we have to be careful that we are then not seen as a new prompter of the French, the alternative French position. I hope we are not going to allow ourselves to be. Instead, I'm so happy at the way we've just allowed the brouhaha over that coup to face out, the coup in Niger. And I think it should allow us, and maybe our academy should take another look at how Nigeria and ECOWAS should look at the new developments in the Sahel and pull our way back and pull these people back into the, into the compound. But we can only do this if we don't allow ourselves to be seen as a prompter of France. But it's something I throw back at your court.
Yeah, thank you, sir. You see, January 4 is almost here. In between now and January 4, the French might have succeeded in actually destabilizing Niger, because all research pointers are clearly showing that the French, as promised, want to destabilize the Tiani government in Niger, because they said, well, they are there temporarily. And they are now saying from various reports that they are coming to destabilize. So since you say that, and rightly too, that we should not prompt them, I think Nigeria should not be an instrument in the hands of France in destabilizing Africa in general and Niger in particular, our neighbor, because we are looking forward to January 4 for the usual tradition of our of your birthday, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good night, everyone. Have a nice time. See you all next year.